Welcome to Language Matters. I'm Ludmila Golovine, CEO of MasterWord Services, and today we're honored and privileged to have an amazing guest whom some of you may have already seen on MTV, TED Talks, and Jimmy Kimmel Live for her innovative applications of sign language techniques. We're honored to introduce Amber Galloway, MasterWord's Associate Director of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Division. Amber, welcome. So I have a question, Amber. As an ASL interpreter and teacher, you have a very unique communication access style for the deaf and hard of hearing at music concerts. Can you tell us a little bit more what prompted you to do something different there?
Sure. Actually, I got started with this over 20 years ago. I honestly taught and was trained by the deaf community when I was living in San Antonio. The deaf people there taught me everything I know. And we would talk and they would tell me the things that were missing when it came to music interpretation, what they wanted to see during concerts. And I took that information, dug in a bit deeper, and started to research and realize that when it comes to language and music interpreting, there are many layers, and I had to look through and see what needed to be added.
So what is it that you added that, as a deaf person, I'm a hearing person. So how would a deaf person perceive music? Or can they hear music? Can they hear maybe a beat? Or what happens there?
So, of course, deafness is a spectrum. So sometimes people come to concerts and we don't know exactly what their level of hearing loss is. Take my situation, for example. I have hearing loss, and my experience of music is very different than another friend of mine who has profound deafness. So with that in mind, it's definitely a unique individual experience for everyone in the community. Of course, I've gotten a lot of feedback from the community about one thing that is universal, and that is that getting close to the stage is where you're going to feel the most vibration and the most impact during a concert. That's where they can really connect, by being close up to the stage. So one thing is, with feeling that vibration, they cannot differentiate all the sounds that they're experiencing. So what I did was I began to realize that that part of the interpretation was not necessarily being portrayed, and that we had to think about different ways that we could communicate the different sounds and how those sounds are different. And one thing that I noticed from the deaf community is that they have their own way of showing sounds. When it comes to American Sign Language, there are ways to take sounds and apply those to the language. And so as I went along, I took that direct feedback from the community when they tell stories, and I used it to communicate which instruments and what the sounds of the instruments were. Because for many, many years, interpreters would only show the lyrics to the songs. But of course, we know that lyrics are not the only part of music. There's so much more to it, that it's a layered thing. So with that, I have been able to develop my own style, which is, of course, incorporating what I was getting from the deaf community and their natural language and what we know of the full experience of music.
And that almost became kind of like a movement at this time. And when I looked at the recordings of some of the interpreters and yourself interpreting at concerts, it's almost more amazing and fascinating to look at the interpreter. You feel the whole story. Even if you turn the sound off, you feel the story. So it's kind of like a full body interpreting in a way. Is that correct? Or how does that work?
Definitely, because remember that we become all of the instruments as interpreters. So during the show, we're not only taking on the voice and the lyrics, we're taking on the drums, we're taking on the violin, we're taking on all of the instruments. We have to be able to communicate all of that while also communicating the rhythm. So if our rhythm is off, we're not matching the song. If the instrument's off, we're not matching that. So we want to be able to move with the music. And for many years, interpreters felt afraid to move because they didn't want to be noticed and they didn't want to catch anyone in the audience's attention. And so, of course, we want to incorporate movement, but we don't want it to be out of control to where we are stealing that spotlight. So it's definitely a dance. And it's a situation where we do want to incorporate everything, but we want to really embody the artist, their message, and the music within our interpretation.
How do deaf people perceive music, right? We would be thinking normally that if a person is deaf, they can't hear music, they can't play an instrument, yet we have examples of some of the most famous composers like Beethoven, who was deaf, and he produced the music that the whole world knows. And I know other people, and in case of MasterWord, I know Cody Francisco plays piano very, very well. So how do deaf people perceive music? How they're able to play musical instruments? And that would lead me to my next question, about being, because deaf, let's stick with the first part of the question, because I'm going to ask the second one later.
So I can only speak from my own experience as a person with hearing loss and those who were within my close circle, the people that have shared their experiences with me. I know that I have heard from them that vibrations are critical, a very important way of connecting with music. Of course, hearing people who are thinking about music only think about the ear and the function of the ear and what the ear does for the reception of music. But we have to think about what all is behind sound. And when vibrations come in, when we're close to the music and we feel that vibration, it triggers the brain in the same place that taking in information auditorily triggers the brain. There have been studies on that show that. So again, as hearing people, we think, oh, we're only experiencing music through the ear. So if there is, if you can't hear, then how do you experience it? But remember that when we go to concerts, it's a whole experience. There's a connection to the other audience members. There's the smell, the touch, the vibrations, the visuals. So it's more than just what's being taken in by the ears. But let's not focus on that. Let's think about, that this is almost a way that hearing people limit the experience of deaf people by assuming that they can only experience it through their ear, when in reality, deaf and hard of hearing people love to go to concerts because, most of the time there's so many barriers to access. A lot of times they want to go to concerts, like let's say, for example, they buy a concert ticket and they want to go to the show. They have to email and contact, and it may take 2 or 3 months fighting for access to the concert to get a response saying, yes, we've secured interpreters. So sometimes the answer is no. And so they feel that they've bought a ticket, but they're not welcome. So instead of thinking about music being a thing that requires the ear and saying, oh, deaf people can't go, they shouldn't be welcome here, they're not going to have the experience. Allow them to have that access, because they can it's a missed opportunity when you have a person that buys a ticket that wants to come and you're not allowing them to go, deciding how they're going to get access when it's really not about the ear at all.
So we have only then, as hearing people, a very erroneous perception that the music world, what I'm hearing you tell us, is just perceived, the world of sound is just perceived through our ears. When in fact, you're telling us the music world, and you're reminding us the world of sound is the world of frequency and the world of vibration. And deaf people actually perceive that in a different way, in a very beautiful way. And it's a way of interaction. So it is incorrect for us to assume that if somebody is deaf, they cannot enjoy music. And that's a very interesting perspective. So
yes, and if I may add to that also, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but think about it. This is a shared experience. Think about it. We are first being exposed to music from the time that we're in the womb. Because what's our first experience of music? What is the first music that we hear? It's our mother's heartbeat. That rhythm of our mother's heartbeat. That's a universal experience. That's the first music we're exposed to. So that means we all have that experience, whether we're deaf, hearing, blind, whatever our own circumstance and journey may be. We all start from the same place within our mother's womb where we're experiencing that rhythm for the first moment.
And
And so we have that shared.
I would be one of those wrong people who would say the first music you experience is your mother's voice. It is amazing. It is indeed, you're right. It is the mother's heartbeat.
Yeah. Exactly.
So for deaf people to be fully included and to have access and communication access to music and concerts and the same experience, what does it look like? What does good look like? What can we all do?
I think the most important thing is to have a spirit of being welcoming. If there's an event being planned, if you're getting ready to set up any kind of event whatsoever, you want to make sure that you are proactive with inclusion and access. While you're going through those planning phases, think about that, so that if you say, okay, we've got the lights for everyone, we've got the speakers, we've got the interpreters, make this a thing that's in the budget already, that inclusiveness and access is already part of that budget, because we have the tools to make sure that these things are successful. They're already developed. So I would say for those who are putting on any kind of concert, any kind of event, to be proactive with access, show that you are welcoming the entire community, that you're saying, hey, we want you guys to come, welcome our community, show that respect for our culture, instead of saying, oh, we haven't thought about this. Once the deaf person's asking and begging for access, because often it's not a situation where they're being welcomed, it's a situation where the deaf people are having to ask to go. So let's say, for example, you as a hearing person want to go to an event. Let's say that, there's some kind of event you're interested in. Would you be willing to fight for 2 months to get access to a speaker just so you can hear? Would you be willing to email multiple times and say, hey, I'm coming to the conference, can you please put a speaker there so I can hear what the person who will be presenting is saying? I mean, that sounds silly, right? So it's the same concept. Hearing people never have to fight for communication access, so they have no idea how it feels and often don't have the patience. But the deaf and hard of hearing community are going through this fight on a daily basis. On a daily basis, they fight for their basic right to communication. So think about that, instead of making them fight for it, why not just be proactive and welcome them from the start?
What can we as people, as language professionals, you're speaking to language professionals, MasterWord is a language services company, but what can we as people, as individuals do to improve language access?
I think it's really about education. And when I say that, I mean, oftentimes we don't know other fields. We may have a bit of knowledge about things, but be proactive in that. Learn about this. Understand what inclusivity looks like and the value of inclusivity. When it comes to language access, it's not about just language, but also about communication and connecting with others. So think about becoming an advocate for each other. If you should go somewhere and you see that inclusivity is not happening, speak up and say, why is this not inclusive? Why is there not an interpreter here? Be part of that fight. Say, why don't we have a diverse community here? Why don't we have representation with a Spanish interpreter? Whatever it may be, go there and fight for fights that are not necessarily your own personal fight, but we see so often as interpreters that there are people that don't want to provide. And most of the time, I feel like people can get the wrong impression about some of the people that host these events. They may come across as callous or not wanting to provide, but oftentimes it's just the lack of education and they just don't know. And so if we take that time to say, hey, we're here, we'd like to share this with you and ultimately want you to provide, a lot of times people are more welcoming and open than we expect.
Shall we redefine the word maybe as a suggestion, from fight to movement? from fight to movement and I think one of the great examples of that is also Real Abilities that's taking place in Houston next month. Can you tell us a few words about that? What is that event? And
Yes, I love that particular event because Real Abilities gets eyes on the people who are wanting to be seen, who need to be seen, and have different abilities. Because again, most of the time, people with different abilities have to fight. So, like you said, we want to see that movement, and Real Abilities is definitely doing that in a big way. They're making sure that the people who have different abilities are being seen, their expertise, their skills, their gifts and talents are there. Because sometimes there's situations where people are being seen, but they're not being seen on a big stage. They're often having to fight or being pushed away or not included. So this is a real opportunity for people with different abilities to get out there and show off their awesome talents, let people see who they are, let them shine. It's going to be great.
well, I personally was very, very impressed and humbled by the way you redefined access to music through changing the interpreting technique. Is that correct way of saying it, or style?
I would say it's technique and style.
Is this something that an interpreter can learn, and where do I go learn it as an interpreter?
Definitely, definitely. Actually, we host an ASL Music Camp that goes in depth for a week. And that is a place where we have skilled interpreters, we have deaf interpreters that come for 40 hours of training. And so all the attendees come out and learn. It's a great place to learn how to interpret music into ASL. We also teach the people that come in how to advocate for the deaf and hard of hearing community. And also we talk about how to have deaf heart and deaf eyes, understanding from a deaf perspective, because often, again, the voice of the deaf and hard of hearing community is never heard. So hearing people are all often in the leadership position, and they're making decisions without listening to the deaf and hard of hearing community. And again, like I said, deafness is on a spectrum. You have people who are profoundly deaf, deaf blind, hard of hearing. So we need to hear all of their voices. All of their voices matter. All of their experiences and preferences matter. And we need to have representation. And that's something that we share in the camp as well.
And I have one last question. I really appreciate the fact that you joined MasterWord. You're already very well established in the industry, and wanted to ask you why you joined MasterWord. And I know we're hiring additional sign language interpreters. We're growing our deaf and hard of hearing team. So how can we encourage more sign language interpreters to join our team? So what's your why?
My why is really about deaf leadership and language access. I've seen that MasterWord has multiple deaf and hard of hearing people working with your company, and also that you make it not only about just ASL access and interpreters, but also have deaf representation in various divisions, including accounting and with coordinators. And I was very impressed to hear about that. I also see that you guys are moving with heart. And I've always wanted to work with a company that does what they do from the heart. I advocate for that always. And so that's my deepest desire, is to work from the heart. And so I'm excited to join MasterWord because I'm so impressed with everything that's happening, and excited that there will be more to come, and that we're just going to keep expanding and changing lives for many people. And really, I know that our common goal is to see that change be sustained and sustainable change. We want to improve the lives of many. I think that's what we're going to be doing here at MasterWord.
Well, thank you for saying that. We're looking forward to also having interpreters hopefully join us. And we're looking forward as a company to joining forces and joining deaf and hard of hearing community in making a difference and improving communication access. Want everybody to learn about access to music, and thank you for the interview today.
And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Amber. I love ASL.
Great. Awesome.